There we go.
I left the city, I've been browsing, treading water that they drowning. My head on the swivel, yeah. It's only really my surroundings.
Hello and welcome to episode 50 of the Smash Accept podcast. I'm your host, Michael Royer. You can find me on Twitter at Dynasty_DadFF. And joining me as always is my co-host, wrapping up his first Scott Fish Bowl. Mung, how you doing today?
Hey, pretty good. I went to the dentist earlier, so my teeth are all sparkly and clean. And we're getting ready for the weekend, but getting ready to talk some fantasy football first.
You're really hitting them with the exciting stuff, talking about getting their teeth cleaned and things like that. Mung, we've had some great guests over the past couple of months. Obviously, talking about everything. We deal specifically with trades. We have had a lot of guys from the film aspect. Tonight, we're going to talk about analytics. And when we're talking about analytics, who better to have on than Jordan McNamara himself? How you doing?
I'm good, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're super excited. I mean, book number 2 just came out, or is it second edition to book number 1? I mean, I've heard a lot from your days back at Under the Helmet. Now you're football guys doing your own things over, at your own podcast. Talk to us a little bit about what you have going on, because I know you're super busy.
Yeah, it's the third Analytics of Dynasty. So it's the 2021 edition. Yeah, and it's just, again, we're just trying to make better decisions, and just framing it through that context of like, hey, let's find the really bad bets and not make them. Honestly, is I think that's a great way to play Dynasty, and then it's a lot of it: startup drafts, rookie drafts. I have an entire chapter on just the just strategies like outside of football that I think are super relevant to use, which is something I try and incorporate every year. And each year is different too. So like if you've read one of the first ones or something like that, I'm not necessarily going to say the data evolves, but we look at different things. And I think we can search out and find different efficiencies and different things. And it continues to grow. So an idea that I had in the second one in 2020 sort of delves into, I branch off it in the third one. And I'm actually writing 4.0 right now. And there's just some stuff that, I've never got to, and that I've never, been able to cover. I never had the data to cover. I never sort of could figure out how to do it. And so now we got it. And, so it's an ongoing process, and it's fun. And and then I got I do a daily Dynasty podcast at analyticsatdynasty.com. And obviously the Football Guys show with my partner in crime, Chad Parsons.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's where I first heard about it. But I've seen a lot of great things. I mean, I saw you from your table of contents. One thing about team building strategy that I want you to elaborate a little bit on is it starts right out. It says 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. Tell me a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, so there's a book by a woman by the name of Susie Welch, and she wrote 10 minutes. It was 10 minutes, 10 months, 10 years, basically short, intermediate, long-term thinking about your life decisions. And a lot of it is like, hey, if you go back, evaluate this decision and put yourself 10 minutes from now and look back on this decision, and what would you say? Or put yourself in, 10 months from now. What would 10 months from now Jordan say about this decision? 10 years, same thing. I decided to sort of adopt it for Dynasty. I don't think it's 10 because you're lucky. Everyone's still talking to each other 10 years from now in your Dynasty league. But so for me, it's more 2-2-2. So I look, it's 2 weeks, 2 months, and 2 years. And so, like, you were talking Scott Fish Bowl and those sorts of things. Like, I'm in a Dynasty startup draft that literally just finished. And today it just finished. And the decisions that I made at the beginning of it had a huge impact on the rest of the stuff that I did along the way. And I'll give you a great example. Like someone says, what do you think about Travis Kelce in a startup draft? Well, if you draft Travis Kelce in a startup draft, like you have to draft a certain way, right? You can't really go a long-term build. And it's not to say you're just going to, play redraft, but you can't really take developmental, long shots because it's not going to maximize your team, right? You kind of have to do it right now if you're going to take Kelsey early. That's not to say it's the wrong answer. It's just you kind of have to know what your aim is. And so a lot of it's that, right? And then, the decisions that we make now should have are going to have ramifications over the, in the real near term, in the medium term, right, going into the season, and then over the course of your year. And then you have to kind of balance that. Again, that's a lot of thinking about, if I make a trade right now, it's fine if I sort of totally put myself heavy on wide receivers, for example. Like if I identify, or I'll even use a better example. If I can find Deshaun Watson at what I think is a discount right now, like even if I have two really good starting quarterbacks, like I'm playing the long game on that, right? And that might be 2 months, 2 years down the line, but that is definitely a long game that I'm playing. I'm not worried about what my starting lineup looks like July 14th. I'm worried about sort of what the implications could be at some point in season or multiple years out in terms of what his implications could be. So that's one of the things, again, then in that case, you're kind of waiting down the line a little bit further, in your equation than you are, but just understanding what lens you're looking for and what your aim is, I think is really important.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I actually had a question earlier this week. Someone messaged me. They're like, hey, I'm at the late second here in my startup draft, and I'm trying to decide between Travis Kelce and CeeDee Lamb. And I said, well, I mean, that is a totally different spectrum, right? I love CeeDee Lamb. When I draft for upside and those kind of things. But I said, he's like, I really want Kelce. I said, well, when you do that, that changes everything in your draft. And he said, what do you mean? The third round will just take best player available. And I was like, yes, but you've put yourself in a situation where by taking Travis Kelce, you are pushing in early, and that's a team that you're trying to win right away. Where you take CeeDee Lamb, now you have that option for best player available in the third round because now, you have a good enough player who's gonna, only improve. And we're going to talk about CeeDee Lamb a little bit later here, but then you leave things open. So it's like a lot of times I think everyone just looks at things right in the front of their face. And Mung, you and I have been talking a lot about, you don't have to make your rosters right now. You don't have to set your starting lineups. Deshaun Watson, I'm glad to hear you say that because that's someone that we've been talking about for months.
Yeah, and definitely in startups, I mean, that's why you lean with the younger players, right? Because not only do they retain the value, they're more flexible in terms of trade assets. So like you said, with Kelce, you're committing to that almost win now route. And that doesn't necessarily preclude you from, trading him away for younger players at some point if that doesn't work out. But that's one reason why I think Kittle or even Waller would be your locked in, number one dynasty tight end. And I still see people having Kelce there. And yeah, he's going to be dominant for as long as he's in Kansas City with Mahomes over the next couple of years. But, that doesn't take away the fact that his trade value is still going to plummet sometime in the near future.
Yeah, and Mung and I are always answering trade questions, and I know you are as well. And Jordan, I know sometimes you catch a little backlash because sometimes people they're so focused on that 2 weeks, right? They see that trade and they John, our other co-host, we talk about it all the time, where people are just buying into the hype too late, right? Like once the hype already happens, once that big decision happens, now you can't buy anymore. Now you're just straight overpaying, and you're putting yourself in a position for your dynasty teams to falter from there.
Yeah, and I wrote about this. Actually, Chad, my co-host of Football Guys, Chad Parsons, and I had a draft, and it was the summer of it was the summer 2018, and at the time, and I detailed this in the book, Rob Gronkowski was coming off a pretty good season, but there was beginning to be like a echo, like off in the distance of retirement rumors. Nothing like super serious, but it was there. And it was a two tight end. It was a start two tight end premium juiced up. Right. And it was a very tight end friendly atmosphere. And the other person that we had was Mike Evans. And so our decision in our draft was, do we take Gronk or do we take Mike Evans? Right. That's what the decision, we were going to take one of the two. There was no trading out. There was no doing anything. Like it ended up having to be those two. And it became a spot of like, all right, like you have to know right? And I sort of analogize this to like if you're kind of walking down, if you're sort of walking down the hallway, right? There's only when you have Kelsey, right? There's only so many exits. Right? There's probably only one. Right. And so where you have Mike Evans, like you've got a lot of different exits. Right. So if there's a fire, there's a lot of different ways you can get out. Right. You can, there's a lot of different ways to build that team with contingencies in it. With Kelsey, there's not. And that's not. And the more I've played Dynasty, the more I've sort of rejected the idea that value is an actual thing that we can predict in the future. I just don't think it is. It's production, right? You're only as valuable as productive you are, and then there's an age component to it too. But it's generally if you're not productive, you don't retain your value. So it ends up becoming a lot of that. So so I sort of understand, and we really hashed that out, and it really became a defining point of like, here's what our team we want to be with this Gronk versus Evans decision, and it ended up, that you just have to know when you're at that, and it's not to say there's a wrong decision there, but you just have to know the implications of it and sort of what you're going to do to pivot off of it. Don't take a bunch of, if you're going to take Kelsey, don't take a bunch of day 3 rookie wide receivers that you think are going to be long-term successes, because A, they're not, and B, they're not going to help you in the Kelsey window.
Mung, one of our listeners actually sent in a question, and I saw that you answered it on Twitter today. Now he has Kyler Murray and Trey Lance, and he's like, I got to get rid of one of these quarterbacks. He felt like in order to get Travis Kelce to put him over the top, he had Aaron Rodgers, Jalen Hurts, and Matthew Stafford. And I want you to talk a little bit, kind of like what he was talking about with Gronk, of what your decision was with that and how you would be liking to move forward with that.
Yeah, I think the trade was actually he has Stafford, Hurts, and Rodgers, and he's trading 2 of those for, I believe it was Dak Prescott and Travis Kelce in a 2-quarterback dynasty league. And my response to him was, I usually go with, I'm a more, let's call it risk-adverse dynasty GM, in that I'll shy away from the pricier guys at cost. And then I also look at what's the worst possible potential outcome for a certain player. And, to him, I responded, basically, Aaron Rodgers is going to be 38 years old in a couple months. He's coming off of a career year with an insane touchdown rate. He is the definition of a sell-high candidate for me. I wrote about him in one of my big-name dynasty players to avoid article, I think a couple months back. And then Jalen Hurts, I talked about him a little bit on Twitter, where if you are win now, if you're getting Dak Prescott as your other quarterback, then maybe you can take a shot on Jalen Hurts, because it sounds like the Eagles are pretty committed to him. And we know that he carries that rushing floor and upside. As long as you understand that there is the risk of the Eagles moving on from Hurts potentially as soon as 2022. So I think Rodgers is the clear sell here. And for me, I would keep Stafford of the 3, because I think he has a pretty solid high-end QB2 floor, and he does have a pretty high ceiling as well, albeit not probably touching on the elite options.
Yeah, it seems like he's definitely going all in. I mean, obviously he wants Kelsey. Jordan, I know you're big on Dak Prescott. Mung and I have been big on him this particular year. I mean, we both had our Bold Takes show a couple weeks ago with Dave Richard from CBS. We were saying Dak is that QB1 dark horse, like QB1 overall. I mean, that is in that range of outcomes. And if he's going and getting Kyler Murray and Dak Prescott, and he already has Trey Lance on his bench, out of those 3 quarterbacks between Rodgers, Stafford, and Hurts, who's the one that you'd be keeping?
I'd keep Stafford. If so, just so I have this framed right, you could sell Hurts and Rodgers for Dak and Kelsey. Is that how I understood the trade?
Yeah.
I would drop my 9-month-old to accept.
Get that smash accept, right?
I would. I'm working on a scale. I'm actually working on a scale. Does
your scale have like at what point you'll drop your 9-month-old.
Yeah. So run over grandma's on there, like run over my toddler's on there, but a relatively low level of urgency because that's justice sometimes. So I'm working on it. I'm working on a scale, but that would be a relatively high one if I could trade Hurts. And I love Rodgers, and I really like Stafford too. I think Stafford's probably the best blend in here of longevity and elite upside. And floor and the triad combination there, I think that's pretty. He's probably the best bet. But Dak Prescott's, I think, the second best quarterback in Dynasty, and I think there's a tier break after him. So I would run to do that.
Yeah, and you talked about it's a long game. I mean, Dak Prescott was a quarterback, especially. We talk about this all the time on our rebuild type shows where you target those injured players. And I know last year I traded when as soon as he went down, I traded Deshaun Watson for Dak Prescott in the first. I mean, those kind of moves where now you're like that. I mean,
what can you do now? What could you do? What could you flip back now? You could trade Dak for Watson and two firsts maybe. Probably. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's incredible when you think about that.
Exactly. And I mean, Dak was phenomenal last year. I mean, he really was, and he was on pace to be the QB1, and he looked the part. But people are so quick to, like you said, that 2-week window where it's like, oh, well, now I need a quarterback instead of going out and using a 3rd-round pick and a throw-in player to get a someone to fill in. They're like, hey, let's go all in and get Deshaun Watson. Now that trade, I'm not doing it to shame my league mate, but I'm like, at that point, that trade looks really bad, and those kind of things happen. I really want to talk a lot about your chapter 4, where your rookie value strategies, and talk a little bit about rookie hit rates, because we all just finished all of our rookie drafts, and everyone thinks that every player on their roster is going to hit, right? We all have those day 3 guys. Yeah, they're going to be great because we love the upside, right? And we all believe in all of that. Talk to me a little bit about some of your findings when you came across rookie hit rates. And we'll start, I don't know if you want to go position by position, maybe start with the wide receivers and get into the running backs a little bit.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think by and large, the biggest takeaway is that we overestimate how valuable guys will be. And I think, honestly, just day 3 wide receivers, if I could give you one tip, day 3 wide receivers hit less than 5% of the time. Just don't draft them. I mean, you can do so much better. And the problem with them too is you get baited, right? Because you're like, this is year 3, he needs time to develop. He's, and then you've held him for 36 months, and that could have been how many running backs? That could have been how many spot start quarterbacks? It could have been how many, one injury away guys? It could have been how many streamer tight ends, right? You just to the reverse math on that, you're like, man, I gave up all that roster spot could have been really valuable, and it was a terrible bet, right? I had sticky fingers to a terrible bet. So that would be I think the overarching takeaway. And I really look at player profiles, especially between running backs and wide receivers. I basically look at it. I think they're similar levels, but they start at different rounds. So, for example, I think running backs, clearly a 1st-round running back goes over any wide receiver. And then you look at round 2 running backs with round 1 wide receivers are about the same. Round 3 running backs with round 2 wide receivers are pretty close. I would lean running back there, but I think they're generally speaking going to fall in the same tier. I think you almost always at those costs break towards the running back would sort of be my thought. And then after that in the draft, round 4 running backs fit with round 3 wide receivers pretty closely. They look very similar. And that's kind of how it looks. And then after that, you kind of avoid the wide receivers in day 3. So that's generally how it works. But I think that we get, Amon-Ra St. Brown right now. We do this story every year. And that's not the knock on Amon-Ra St. Brown, but hey, the guy coming in is going to be the situational darling from day 3. That's really rare. It just doesn't happen all that often. So that would sort of be my caution that I would overall have on the wide receiver position. The other thing too is I'm thinking about writing a chapter, which is the 10 rules I've learned, the 10 things I've learned that I'll never do again. And I'll never trade up for a receiver in a rookie draft ever again. It's just never going to happen. And just Like we're terrible, and this isn't anyone's fault, but we're just really bad at predicting future success. And one area that shows up in that's really kind of horrifying is ADP. When you just look at first round wide receivers, ADP isn't predictive of success, right? So what that means is if you just randomly drew out of the first round wide receivers, you would do as well as ADP has done within those wide receivers. That's not good. The same thing with the NFL draft. The order in which wide receivers go off in the first round of the NFL draft is not predictive of their success, right? So we vault guys up for going, or their likelihood to hit. We vault guys up and and say, hey, this guy went 20 spots higher in the first round, and then we elevate them. Whereas a lot of times what I think is probably the more prudent play is like, we'll just sit and wait and take the leftovers, right? Like let everyone else take the bet that they're really, really confident in. And I just kind of know it's random. So that's a lot of how I treat the receiver position. I'm very much a depressed assets kind of investor at the wide receiver position. And once I get a really good profile, I just hold on to it. And, I'm kind of a buy and hold investor at the position.
Well, and I think the one thing, and whether you call it, productive struggle or however you want to do it, when you talk about your startups, some of the most successful ones that I've done and the advice that I try to give a lot of times is take those wide receivers. Right now the running back trend is come out with 3 running backs in the first, the beginning of your startups. And that's kind of tough because if you look at things, you take those wide receivers early, you take those guys that you believe in, those guys that are young and they're hitting, the Justin Jeffersons, the CeeDee Lambs, the top-notch guys that are really starting to ascend, the A.J. Browns, DK Metcalf. Then you get those running backs in your rookie draft, which is what you're saying is a lot easier, a predictive hit rate on your running backs, where wide receivers becomes a lot more difficult.
Yeah, and I think the other thing. So I've actually done some study on the productive struggle, and it's interesting. It's really interesting to me because I think a lot more people try to implement it than can, just because there's not a ton of people that are looking to trade off future first, right? That's the research that I found over the leagues that I was able to get my hands on, which is a pretty big set. It was like 15% of teams traded away their first. They're not that big of it's not really that huge of a number. And
I feel like that just keeps going down and down, like the better the draft class we have. Like when 2014 came out, no one was trading 2015 because they're like, oh, next year's class might be hitting, because they believe that. And 2020 was so hot. I mean, you basically, if you didn't take Keyshawn Vaughn in the first, which thank God, if you listen to our podcast, you didn't. But if you didn't take him, you hit. And then all of a sudden those draft picks happened where, the 2017 was so good, but 2018, 2019 classes they were okay. And that I felt like there were a couple drafts where I came out with a bunch of them. I came out with 6 firsts in one of them. And when you can get one of those drafts and everybody knows, but the more and more I do it, I mean, we did Smash Accept Listener League 1 and 2 first round picks people were holding on to. Every draft I've done this offseason, people are holding on to them, and it's become a lot more difficult.
Yeah, I misspoke. It's 24% that have traded away their future first. So I misspoke there. I think I said 15%. Yeah, and so what I think is interesting about it is like when you look at the expected, what happens to the teams. I don't think anyone's ever done an actual study on it. It's a lot of narrative about it, but what happens is really fascinating. So I went back and I've studied 2 years now, and so in the first year, the teams that traded away their first won on average 7 games, so 53.8%. The teams that did nothing won 49% of their games, so 6.4 essentially. And then the teams that traded for future first round picks, so I called those teams in surplus, right? They've got extra first round picks going forward. They won 40% of their games, so just about 5.25. And then what's really interesting is the second year. So the second year, the in surplus teams actually do the best. So the teams that actually traded for future first, on average, there's a caveat to this. On average, they did the best at 7 wins. The teams that did nothing actually did the worst, which is interesting, at just over 6 wins. And then the teams that were in debt we're at 6.2 wins. Well, when you combine them over the first 2 years, and see, this is the thing that I think people get a little bit lost on. The teams that, like, you can get a really elite team, and the way the team sort of showed up, if you trade away a future first, right? I think what happens there is there's a good chunk of those teams that become really elite, and then there's everybody else, and they try to revamp it, and they really fall out. So what you see is a lot of the really elite teams come from that in debt. Come from the teams that traded away. But when you sort of average it out, they look relatively close. But what you see is the really, really, really good teams come from there. And so over the first, when this is interesting, so over the first 2 years, on average, teams that traded away their future picks won 13.2 games. Teams that did nothing won 12.4 games, and teams that were in surplus, so they traded for an extra pick, won 12.3 games. So I actually think that there's a big takeaway from that, which is I think people do it wrong. So I think people do a productive struggle and they load up on wide receivers late in the draft, and I think that's really suboptimal. And I think that's why you actually put yourself, because you could do both. Like if you wanted to, I just did it in a league, and I'm going to detail it. But I just did it, right? I went productive, and I got future assets, and I don't think you could tell where I traded my startup pick out. Like I don't. If you looked at my roster, you probably couldn't tell, and I think that leaves me with a lot of options, right? Because then I've got multiple future firsts, I've got multiple future seconds. And what really happens is I gravitate towards a really consolidated and good wide receiver core, and guys that they're really, and this year it's like shooting fish in a barrel. Like you can stack up Amari Cooper, Allen Robinson, Keenan Allen, Mike Evans, Juju Smith-Schuster, and all of a sudden like you've got like a really robust production crew right there, and it's cheap. And so that's the thing that I would sort of encourage people to focus on is not, but that allows you to draft 6 wide receivers instead of drafting 16, which I think people do way, way, way too much of. Again, taking way too many, hey, in 3 years when I'm good, like all these wide receivers are going to be good. They're probably not. Like the numbers just like if 1 or 2 of those guys are good, you've done really well. So that would sort of be my angle on it. I think that you can sort of walk a tight line and do both, and I don't think it actually hurts you. I think that's actually where an elite ceiling comes in with like a hybrid approach. I call it a two-way go.
I think you're on mute.
Yo, am I right now?
Yep,
yeah, it was a
good.
great point you were making on mute.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That never happens. I mean, Mung wants to mute me, but my mute never happens.
my best podcasts happen when I'm on mute, man. That's undisputable. no one can doubt that.
Exactly.
Can't be wrong if they can't hear you.
Right.
No, what I was saying was, and Mung and I have been talking about this a lot, is those rounds 3 through 7, 8 are just loaded with wide receiver value. I mean,
Absolutely.
Pushing out, getting your quarterbacks early, is great, and those running backs are in there. But there's wide receivers. I mean, you get to even in Scott Fishbowl. I mean, I came out with the most ridiculous wide receiver core because I was just that's where you want to get them. Taking them too early at this point is a bit of a struggle. Mung, anything you want to add to that? Because I thought that was great to listen to. I mean, as far as knowing. Because everyone feels like, oh, they're going to trade that first and they're going to be so much better and they're going to move themselves into a position where they're going to be good for several years, and from how many particular leagues was that across? I don't know, maybe
it was across, I think it was 300.
Wow. That's
Sorry, I think 300 teams. So I had 300 teams.
Yeah.
So that's 25.
Yeah, that's awesome because it's like it basically. I mean, that was some information that really stuck out to me because I get questions all the time about startups about what to do with their first round picks. And I'm always on the verge. In the beginning, when I first started playing Dynasty, I used them like candy, right? And I think that's part of it. Like the younger Dynasty owners really don't evaluate first round picks the way they should. They just kind of say, well, I want this player and I'm going to move here and I'm going to get rid of that first. And then I feel like the productive struggle team that you had there, those are the guys that seem to be a little bit more savvy, been doing it longer, understand what that first is looking like. And that would be interesting to see what happens year 3, 4, 5. And the further you move out, it's got to sway so much further in that direction.
Yeah, I'm going to keep tracking it. And I will bet, like, I'll be interested to see, like, I think there'll be a spot where it'll become random. Like, maybe it's after like year 3 or 4. But I think it'd be really interesting because I agree with you. It's something you need to evaluate. It's kind of like a long-term tracking project that I have at this point. I got to go back and check at the end of the year, sort of see how they did. So it's pretty interesting. Like, what you'll see is the teams that get like really elite buys. So I really look at teams that, you look at playoff rate and then you look at teams that get buys. The buys are a huge percentage of the buys are from teams that traded away their future first, a huge percentage of them. But I don't necessarily think that it's the player that you trade the future first for that does it. I think it's the mindset of, hey, I'm trading away the Kelsey thing. Right. Yeah. Like the Kelsey thing's the perfect example. Like if Kelsey goes off this year, like teams are going to win a ton of championships that drafted this year because they were aligned with Kelsey. Right. Like, if Kelsey and Pitts have the exact same stat line this year, and, Kelsey's going to win a lot more championships because Kelsey's on competitive teams versus where Pitts is coming from. So I think it's interesting. And I think it probably is some signaling from the decisions that they made that actually went along with that pick more so than the pick. That's why I actually think that there's a middle ground there that you could probably not take that big of a loss on. And especially this year, if you just want to sort of operate, like trade a third for a seventh and a future first, like you've lost nothing at wide receiver and you've picked up a future first for free. You've actually probably gained a little bit something at wide receiver because you've avoided a bad bet.
Yeah, absolutely. Mung, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be really interesting to see not only just the percentage of the teams that are, trading away those future picks, but also the timing of those trades. Because even for contending teams, oftentimes I'll try to keep at least 1 or 2 firsts. And that is when I'll actually use those assets for midseason trades, right? When you're already at the point where you're going to make the playoffs. And then also at the same time, those teams that are struggling, they know they have to rebuild at that point. So it's almost there's a bidding. A lot of times you're going to have more capital to land those elite players. And 2, sometimes the opposite happens where those teams that know they have to rebuild are like, yeah, just take this guy. Like I'll even take a second round pick because I know like I'm not going to win this year. So obviously that's harder to track, but I think it goes back to, I don't remember which episode we talked exactly about our overall like dynasty strategy, but I remember one of my points was you got to commit. And, whether it's rebuilding or contending, also, you talked about the teams that are quote unquote in debt in terms of losing those future picks. What percentage of those went all in? They traded all their future picks, right? It's going to be a long rebuild if they don't win that title. But when you have a really good team and there's 1 or 2 other really good teams out there, that's the time, right? You got to push the chips in. So trading away and keeping like 1 or 2 future firsts as that almost hurts you because you're already getting a late pick the next year, so you might as well go for it at that point.
I love that, Mung, because I actually had another one of our listeners reached out and he was like, hey, I'm looking for some running back depth. Do you think it's a good idea to give up my first for Chris Carson right now? I was like, no, like not for depth. If you already have your starting lineup, you don't even have to. We're not talking about starting lineups now. And the opportunity of Chris Carson going down in week 2, and now you just blew a first round pick on a guy who was barely worth a first round pick at any point there. Save those picks for when you make a push, because someone's going to fall out of it and you're going to be able to buy someone younger and better than Chris Carson for that first round pick. Or if Chris Carson's that guy, 3/4 of the way through the season, then we make a move there to get those guys. But you don't want to be buying. Timing is everything, right? So
week 10, week 11, that's when you target those guys. I traded for Chris Carson. I gave up a first for him, I think week 10 or 11 last week. And in that league, I ended up winning the title. But at that point, it was like, even if you don't win, you're taking that shot.
Exactly. Jordan, the other thing you had on there is I saw you have rookie value arcs and rookie career arcs. Can you talk to us a little bit about that before we talk into the big guys? You know, everyone wants to know about the sophomores and what they're going to do based off their rookie years. But talk to me a little bit about those value arcs and career arcs.
Yes, that's a really good question. I think that it's really interesting to sort of know. There's a lot of narratives that just get thrown out and like, hey, you know, this type of player goes up in valuation, or this type of player like is on a surefire track and all those things. So like, I like to look at those and sort of see, you know, just understand what the odds are of players actually going up in value or going down in value. And what we see is like, it's you know, there's a lot of players lose value. And you know, and I think a big part of it too is that buying, and other people have talked about this, and I've sort of looked at it from a number of different ways in terms of a production debate, which is the guys that struggle in year one for wide receivers. Like, do they become buy lows, or do they become guys you run away from? And because there's still an ability to get out relatively close to what you paid for, probably, you know, what do you sort of do? It's really interesting. So one of the things that I found was when you look at wide receivers that lost value after their rookie season. So they lost value from year one to year two. So you're looking at guys like in the first round. So you're looking this year at Judy, you're looking at Ruggs, and you're looking at Rager. 29% of that group rebounds to above where they were as a rookie after the third year. So you're looking at less than a 1 in 3 shot. You know, kind of understanding those things is a pretty valuable thing. You know, the other thing too is like it's really interesting to me is when you really look at player profiles and we look at, you know, what types of players are undervalued. Well, you can also come back and look and say like, hey, what guys are the most likely to go up in valuation, right? What you know, what group of players is most likely to go up in value after their rookie season? Like it's really helpful because it's third round running backs. And so I just sort of look in that prism, and it's a situation where, for a lot of reasons, Trey Sermon makes a lot of sense, but it's not just one. It's not like, hey, I'm attaching a narrative to him landing in San Francisco, but it's also like, hey, look at the third round rookie hit rate. Like, hey, also third round rookies go up in value. So that signals to me that they're probably undervalued as rookies. And we probably, for some reason, the market just doesn't appreciate them, or there's a time discount there, something, but they're undervalued. And so it's really interesting, like being able to understanding those forces that are going on, I think is really, really valuable.
I think there's a lot of people on Twitter right now trying to figure out, and that was great, the year two wide receivers. I mean, you know, Judy had the higher draft capital, and Ruggs, and, you know, and Rager. And those are the guys you said, and they're sitting at 29%. But then, you know, there's people that are like, they're all about Pittman. They're all about Mims. There's so many guys there that had a lot of struggles as a rookie. And it just, and, you know, we want to believe all these narratives, right? We want to believe what's going on in camp. We love these guys because a lot of times we draft a player and we want to keep telling ourselves the narrative year in and year out, you know, for the first 2 or 3 years. Oh, no, he's going to hit. You know, this was the guy that I liked. This was, you know, someone that I believed in the process. And then we just start to find ourselves actually just losing value and continuing to like have a slow bleed through those guys. Yeah,
for sure. The other thing too is I kind of look at once we sort of know what we have in the first year, right? So then when you get guys that hit in the first year, so you look at Jefferson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you know, Josh Jacobs a couple years ago. In this book, I actually looked at, because I was really interested about the Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Josh Jacobs debate last year, because it really interested me in terms of like I had to rank them, and I did a whole bunch of research in terms of like how would you know, what do we know about Jacobs now, and sort of what does that mean? And so when you just look at guys that hit, like it's a massive difference. Like the Jacobs profile right now, and it's amazing to me how written off he's gotten. Like his profile, like over 40% of the guys that have hit the first 2 years coming from the first round of the NFL draft have hit for 3 straight years. right? Like you're looking at almost 50% of them. I mean, that is just an absolutely robust, smashing success. Like just think of a falling in terms of player profiles, a 23-year-old first-round running back with 2 starter seasons on his resume is plummeting in cost. Like, when's the last time that has ever happened? Because I don't think it has. So that's one you sort of look at, I look a lot at profiles. The other one is like Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He was overvalued last year, and he's probably undervalued now because, like, again, he posts one, and like it's a huge hit rate. Like 38% of first-round running backs that hit in the first year of their career hit for 3 straight years. They outproduce guys that, I have a metric called WARP, which is wins over replacement player. First round running backs that have hit as a rookie outproduce the incoming rookie first round guy by a win over the next 3 seasons. Like that's a massive difference. Like that is a massive difference. And so, looking at those guys and looking at those types of players, I think it's really valuable. And, I look a lot at, hey, here are the types of players that we want to be targeting. And then let's find guys that reflect that more so than I really look at like, hey, let's try and find individual players. Like let's try and find the profiles and then get guys that reflect that.
Yeah. And with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, it was almost like, sometimes I've noticed over the last couple of years, it's almost like the post-hype sleeper, right? Like, So Clyde Edwards-Helaire was being projected as, it was crazy. He was going round 1 startups. Like he was going before where Saquon Barkley was going his rookie year, which is just absurd. And then we corrected it, but then we overcorrected it. And now Mung's board just came in. He's getting it set up. I got the one behind me with Kyler and Mahomes, and his has Trey Lance and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So, we've been talking a lot that it's just overcorrected way too far where Clyde Edwards-Helaire Mung is a screaming value.
Yeah, I guess I'm not one for hot takes, but I don't even know if this is one. But I think CH is going to be a first-round startup pick again next year. I'm expecting him to have a really good season. As you said, he's still young. He's got that first-round draft capital. And, that's all I got to say about that.
And Jordan, I'm glad you said something about Jacobs because I've been fighting the Jacobs side with everybody that's come on. Ian Hartitz was down on him. Andrew Erickson, I know Mung's down on him. And Kenyon Drake comes in, and all of a sudden we're like, let's move him to like a fringe RB2, like back end. And he's had some really nice production. And it's just like it's hard to imagine him falling off that far.
What's the argument that Kenyon Drake's better than Josh Jacobs? Because there's not a good one. There's really not a good one. And so, which is amazing.
Yeah.
It's not even like he was horrible last year. He was one of the worst running backs in the NFL in Arizona last year. And it wasn't like I did a Twitter thread and I sort of looked at all the stats and someone was like, what's the argument that Jacobs is better than Drake? I was like, I go, any stat you can pick, he was better than Drake. And you just sort of look down at all. And it actually then prompted me to sort of go and I did a podcast series on it, which was just look at all the competitions, right? And sort of do this analysis of it. And like, he smashed him in PFF grade. He smashed him in over expectation. He smashed him in yards per route run. Like Kenyon Drake's made out to be this great receiving back. Like he doesn't even sniff Jacobs, who has been incredibly underused. Like Drake has had basically one good season that he's hung his entire career on. He had one good portion of a season. And outside of that has not been very good. I don't know. And the funniest thing about it too, like the Jacobs, like the anti-Jacobs argument, like, oh, Drake, like they've really signaled that he's going to be a satellite player, which then leaves Jacobs in exactly the same role. He just finished his RB8. Right. Which is like, hey, we're all pissed off that he's not getting the ball thrown to him, which was like, you'd watch Derek Carr just not even look in his direction. And I would be like, I'd be under my desk, like in the fetal position, because it would drive me insane. Like we're in the same situation. Okay, fine. Like now he's not looking at Kenyon Drake, who's running that route instead of Jacobs. And Jacobs runs for 1,500 yards. Like Jacobs is a discount Nick Chubb. Like they're the same type of profile, and Nick Chubb's probably better than him, but it's the same type of profile. And Jacobs is younger with less mileage. Like I don't know. Like it's to me those profiles. Like you just start looking at profiles and you're like, all right, Jacobs is probably undervalued.
I like it. I like it. So you talked about CeeDee Lamb and Jefferson and guys that hit like they did their rookie year. I mean, do you have any analysis there of like what they do in their career arcs and how sustainable that is? Because, you know, we've talked to a lot of people that have come on, and when they hit like that early, you know, when you got those guys like from 2014 where Beckham and Evans and all those guys hit, and we get these rookie wide receivers that hit right off the bat, their career arcs and how likely they are to do it again, because there's a lot of people now that are investing second round startup capital in these two wide receivers after 1 year. I love both of them. So, I mean, I don't want to put that bias in there, but talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think Jefferson's got the best case to be wide receiver one of anyone that's like young, you know, over, and I would put him over AJ Brown, Metcalf, you know, anyone that's, if you're going to pick a young wide receiver one, like it's, the argument that it's got to be Jefferson is sort of my take on it, just from a volume perspective, from a profile perspective, from a youth perspective, from, you know, just how dominant he was. Like, I mean, he left very little to the imagination last year. So I would sort of be my argument for him. You know, if I was pitching him as wide receiver one, like I think him over AJ Brown's a pretty clear, in my mind, would be a pretty clear one, just from a volume perspective as well. So to answer your actual question, I took us off on a tangent. I'm sorry.
No,
I do these things. I go these very circuitous routes.
You know, we try to keep. You know, we get guests on and that we want to like just talk to and brilliant minds, and it's like we could keep going for hours, but we try to, you know, we get excited, we go on tangents, and we're like try to corral it back in because we try to keep it to an hour, you know, because people lose focus so quick. But like we love just hearing you talk about these kind of things. So keep it up.
Yeah. I'm not going to put myself in a brilliant minds category, but I appreciate the sentiment. So wide receivers, first round guys that hit in their rookie season. So 20% of them, again, the sample size isn't huge, so I wouldn't, you know, lose sleep over any of this, but just to give you an idea, the 20% have hit for 3 straight seasons in a row. So years 2, 3, and 4, they all hit for a top 24 seasonal finish. 60% hit twice, and then 20% didn't hit at all. So as many people have sort of whiffed in the next 3 years as have hit. Again, it's a small sample. I would say, you know, I think the like, to me, Lamb is the one, like if you were, you know, I wouldn't put a certain bet on either side being, you know, hey, here's the guy that's going to hit 3 times or here's the guy that's going to whiff. But I would just say, like, again, we talked about the Kelsey thing earlier on. You know, what do you want? Like, do you want to have like a lot of options? Because like Jefferson can play inside, he can play outside. He's sort of shown that. CeeDee Lamb's a glorified slot receiver, and like that's fine, but be careful paying top 6 prices for that, right? I mean, that's you know, if that's what he's like. He played, to give you an idea, he played like 2.5 or 3 less games in terms of snaps. Like they both played a full season. I think they both played a full season. But on what it worked out per game, essentially Lamb played 2.5 less games than Gallup did last year, because Gallup was playing all the snaps and Lamb was playing like, you know, 65-70% of them, and that. Like, that's not good, right? Like, and then, you know, I guess the counter argument would be like, hey, he'll grow into a role on the outside. Like, maybe, but if as a rookie, like, I don't know. I think that's a scary sign to me if you want to spend really high on somebody. And so I don't, you know, my rule early on is like, just don't miss. Like, just figure out a way to not take a ton of risk early on. And so Lamb, like that alignment slot centric, like won't play him outside type of situation. Like that's scary to me in terms of looking at his profile.
Well, and people won't want to hear this, but you know, there have been a lot of similar arguments made for Lamb as there were for Juju Smith-Schuster not so long ago, where, you know, people are talking, oh, Amari Cooper could get cut at some point, he could be gone, and then, you know, CeeDee Lamb steps into that number 1 role, and, you know, be careful what you wish for, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like And I don't know. I'd be surprised if Amari Cooper's go anywhere. Like they traded first round pick, made a massive investment for him. And now like they're going to cut him. Like, I don't like that doesn't seem to make a ton of sense. Like I get the guaranteed money isn't there and like they could, right? But I don't know. Like their offense would take a huge hit. And like Amari Cooper is really good. Again, if you're just looking at these things, like just I think another easy way to look at it is like, is this person the best wide receiver on his team? Like I don't think the answer for CeeDee Lamb is yes. I think it's no. But I think there's definitely a debate, right? At worst, there's a debate. I think Justin Jefferson's probably the best wide receiver in Minnesota. I think that one's pretty. I think AJ Brown is like DK Metcalf. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure on that one. And so I think when you just sort of frame those things, you can sort of see like I think there's a lot of just looking at profiles. And I have nothing against CeeDee Lamb, but I'm just trying to avoid a huge a catastrophe in the third round of a startup draft. Like I think letting someone else take him is probably the way to go.
Gotcha. What about these running backs? Because this is another thing where right now Twitter's like, well, Cam Akers, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jonathan Taylor, Antonio Gibson, they're all going to hit again this year, right? Every single one of them, it's guaranteed, right? Like, because if you look at startups and you're saying that CeeDee Lamb is a potential pitfall. I mean, we have all of these running backs, Swift included, and Dobbins are all going in that second, third round. They're pretty much all right there. I mean, talk to me. If they hit year one, how does it look for running backs? And if they don't, how does that look?
Yeah, we're at the point of the summer where Jordan needs to go on vacation because I've basically I was a huge fan of Taylor and Swift and Akers to a lesser degree Dobbins and Edwards-Helaire coming out, and now I've convinced myself I'm they're all gonna fail. I've gone through this whole machination of I've just looked at all the flaws of and there's a lot of good there, but I've come to the point of all right, we need to just send Jordan off to an island by himself where he doesn't have the internet for a while and recharge his batteries. So the guys that hit second round running backs that hit really perform like first round running backs that hit. They really look the same over the next 3 years. And again, we could get super far out in terms of hey, what's the next 10-year arc going to look like? The sample's really not that big. And so I'd caution people about that. It's tough to predict that far out, but I really look at I think the rookie contract window is a really good way to look at it. And so they both, 38% of second round guys have hit 3+ times or 3 times over the next 3 years. So basically 4 to start their career. That's a pretty good number, and they actually performed a little bit better than first round running backs, which again, the sample's small. I'm not going to say that they're a better bet, but I think that's an interesting, when you sort of look at it, they actually, the whiff rate is actually a little bit higher for second round running backs than it is for first round running backs than it is for second round running backs that hit in their first year. So I think that's an interesting, it's just, they perform pretty close. I think you could put them in a tier, and there's a big drop off to guys that haven't done it. Right. So again, you're looking for the guys that have done it, it's probably 80+% do it again. If you just sort of group the first 2 rounds together, for guys that haven't done it yet, it's lower than 50, it's at or about 50, depending for round 2 guys, it's lower than 50. And for round 1 guys, it's right about 50, it's a little bit above 50. So just say roughly 50. And that's a big difference, right? Yeah. Again, just looking at profiles, 80 to 50, big difference. And so those guys that hit really put you in a different tier. Again, I like Cam Akers, but you look at the stats from last year, some of the advanced metrics and stuff. It's not a certain, it's the argument that he was better than Darrell Henderson is not a particularly compelling one. Again, I think he's a better player, but from what they've done so far, that's a scary one. So I think you could have, I wish I had done it, which was just to take them all and just have traded between them last year. You could have made a fortune. Fortune.
Yeah, if you started out with Clyde Edwards-Helaire and moved down to Jonathan Taylor plus a first, and then when Jonathan Taylor went off, you got him and Cam Akers plus a first, and now all of a sudden Cam Akers in a 1-quarterback league is a first-round startup pick. Now you can trade him for DeAndre Swift in a first, And in my in college, DeAndre Swift was, in my estimation, the best of them. So it's like
Yes,
it's gotten crazy. And one thing that I've been trying to advocate, and I've talked about it on the show for months, is insulated trades. So taking a guy, what I did in the offseason was I took Jonathan Taylor. And I love Jonathan Taylor, but I traded him for Austin Eckler in the 102, which I call like an insulated
really
trade,
nice.
right? You're getting that running back that is going to produce, because Austin Eckler is going to produce. I mean, he has top 5 potential, and he's going to be top 12 as long as he stays healthy. And Najee Harris fell to 102. So now you got 2 bets. So it's like what you said is like, you're talking a lot about profiles. You're talking about, hit rates and percentages. And it's like, not everybody's going to hit. So if you have those opportunities to take Cam Akers and get Austin Eckler or get, Josh Jacobs plus a lot. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities here to win just by moving back in what people see as ADP and guys that can't miss.
Totally. And the other thing too is like, I look at, and it's not all of these guys are created the same. So I'm sort of working on the toddler dropping urgency smash scale, which that's still in the hibernation phase, but I'm also looking at a core, defining what a core asset is. And I think there's a level to them, right? Like, a guy that you project, Patrick Mahomes is on just a different level than almost anybody else, but they could both be core, so I'm working on it there. But if you sort of look at these, I think Eckler's probably a core guy over the next 2 years, right? And that's kind of how I define core guy. It's like a 2-year window. It's not really that. People think it's like 10, but it's really closer to 2. That's why I use 2 for the 2-2-2 thing. And Taylor, maybe 3-4 years, like that looks pretty good. And then it gets a little bit unclear after that. There's a lot that can happen. And so you sort of look at that and you say, all right, like I'm taking one core guy and turning him into 2, right? Like does Eckler ever have the upside, the longevity upside that Taylor has? Maybe not. But you're getting 2 shots, right? You're getting 2 core assets. That's pretty compelling. You know what I mean? And I think when you sort of look at when you break down trades into being, are you giving away core assets? Are you getting core assets? When you can get 2 core assets, and the difference between them isn't all that much, like that's a smashing success.
Yeah, and people don't look at it that way when you're in season, right? They're not like that first round pick is a core asset. But when that pick became Najee Harris, it sure as heck is. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like now it is a core asset. And even if Najee Harris went 101, it would have been Jamar Chase. And now we're in a situation where it's like, that's a win. And that's how you do those kind of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of trades, I know we're running short on time here, but something I really wanted to ask Jordan. I know you talk about the draft capital invested in these players a lot, and something that I've been trying to look into, and I haven't gotten there yet, is how much weight do you put in for when an NFL team trades up for a player? So, 2017, right, the Chiefs trade up for Patrick Mahomes, and everyone's talking about Deshaun Watson. Watson's been a hit as well. But going back to as recently as last year, we saw people kind of write off the fact that the 49ers traded up in the first for Brandon Ayuk. I'm trying to think what other trades. I know the Saints traded up for Adam Troutman. The jury's still out on that one, but and Jordan Love, people love to hate Jordan Love, but the Packers traded up for him. They've actually historically had a pretty good NFL track record in terms of drafting. So then this year, obviously the same thing applies to Trey Lance. We talked about Trey Sermon a little bit. And then also Jalen Waddle is somebody, who the Dolphins traded back up in the first 4. So what kind of weight are you giving, if any, to, the added draft capital that these teams spent? I
don't. I don't. We looked at it a couple years ago, and there really wasn't anything there. Like, I guess, like, maybe if you wanted to sort of say as like a tiebreaker, like, hey, really good franchise, and I mean, like, there's maybe like 3 or 4 of them, but like, really, really good franchise makes a trade up deal. Like, hey, that should maybe signal us to something. I don't know. The hit rates are so low as it is. Like, I think it's tough to draw a big time, a big time result from that. And you could go back and the hit rates on the quarterbacks, like a huge percentage of them were traded up for recently. And in the same Mahomes and Watson trade, Trubisky was the same thing, right? So again, you sort of look at these things, and it's the samples just aren't big enough to say it, and it looks probably closer to random. If I'll say this, if people are going to, if it's going to change values where the non-traded up for guys are going to be a value, like that's great news, I think.
Jordan, we're getting close to that 1 hour mark, and
you got me all night. You got me all night. The kids are in bed, man. I got stamina.
My kids and my girlfriend will probably get a little bit mad there, but so we've enjoyed having you on and discussing those things. And for someone who hasn't, dove into your book, or someone that hasn't, isn't familiar with it, here's your time. Pitch it a little bit more, because we've talked a lot about it, and then the information that you've presented, I mean, if you hear this, you have to be wanting more, and I certainly do. But talk to us a little bit about, why our listeners should be doing that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the thing with the analytics of Dynasty is we look at strategic things. And when you read the analytics of Dynasty, it's not going to tell you to hey, pick Will Fuller or don't pick Will Fuller. It's going to tell you hey, here are the things to look for. Right, it's going to be and we're working on being the, hey, we're going to teach you to fish more than give you a fish type thing. Yeah. And so we have a lot of strategies, a lot of profiles. And again, and through the Analytics of Dynasty website, I have a subscription service where you can go and actually, I do a Dynasty Daily podcast, and I have a subscriber group chat. And in the group chat, I've noticed there will be people that, of all varieties, right? You got guys that have, 6-figure buy-ins in dynasty leagues. And then you've got guys that are brand new, right? You got a variety of them. And I've kept noticing there's a lot of growth there in terms of they'll start answering their own questions. And it's where it almost becomes yeah, I'm here. But it'll be hey, here's this trade, here's what I'm thinking about it, sort of what do you think? Whereas at the beginning there's hey, I don't know what to do. And right. It's a beautiful thing, right? Because you see them sort of making the growth, and that's kind of what we're doing, right? And we're trying to tackle big topics, so that way we kind of understand big topics, and then we can figure out how to address them on a player by player basis and a trade by trade basis and all that stuff. That's what it's about. And so it's big strategic things like that. I think the best way to go ahead and try and figure out to consume the analytics of Dynasty, I think the best way is I have the 2020 and the 2021 edition as a bundle on the website. I think that's the best way to do it, because it's the way they're sort of work together. It sort of gives you the whole gambit. And so you can go ahead and go over there and get that. I'll write up a coupon code for as Smash as being the coupon code to get you 20% off, any of the books over there at Analytics of Dynasty. And yeah, I mean, that would be, if I was going to tell someone to consume the content like that, would be how it is. We also do stuff like tight end premium scoring. It's something that has always fascinated me. I had a contributor, Scott Connor, do that. P.A. Howdy, Peter Howard did a whole metric series on a whole chapter on rookie metrics that matter, which is something I've always thought would be really helpful. That's in there as well. And my co-host Chad did something on roster retention, which was fascinating. And when I sort of looked at it, it confirmed a lot of the stuff that I thought was right, that it's a lot shorter term game than we probably play. So yeah, you can find all that stuff. There's a ton of stuff on Superflex. If you're playing Superflex, you kind of need to understand the quarterback profiles. And I've got stuff in there that'll help you out and just sort of massively reduce your miss rate.
Yeah, I love it. All three of those guys were on our podcast. Great guys, Peter, Scott, and Chad. Everything you said there was phenomenal. What I really liked what you said is we have our group chat, for our Smash Accept, and we're we're just talking trades. You're talking a lot more broadscape, but the guys in there in the beginning, they would always, Mung, Dad, what's going on? What should we do with this?
Yeah.
Now they're all kind of answering each other's questions. And that's really what I thought was awesome about your book, is what you're saying is you're teaching them how to fish instead of just given those like answers. You know, people are always asking questions and they already know the answers on some of them, but now it's like they get that mentality and learn how to win long-term and play this long-term. So thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate the time. Guys, go out there. You said code SMASH on your website. Did you say where everybody can find that?
Yeah, analyticsatdynasty.com. Yeah, so you can go to analyticsatdynasty.com, and it's there's a bar up on the top. This is by the Analytics of Dynasty, and use the promo code SMASH, and it'll get you 20% off either of the books.
All right, Mung, anything else you want to close on, or anything you're doing over at Fantrax right now?
Yeah, my takeaway from tonight is probably to sell Darnell Mooney and Gabriel Davis among some other priority trade offers. But I've been working on my redraft rankings pretty much daily as we kind of gear up towards the season. But I'll have another update dropping on my top 200, and then I'll have an updated Dynasty rankings coming out pretty soon as well. You can find all that stuff over at Fantrax, and you can find me on Twitter at FFA_Mung. That's MENG.
Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and enjoy the process.